Good evening. Theresa May has spent the day visiting Berlin and Paris with just 3 days to the set date for the UK's exit from the European Union. The Prime Minister is trying to get the backing of Chancellor Merkel and President Macron for an extension to the Brexit process, possibly until the 30th of June. The talks are taking place on the eve of the emergency summit tomorrow in Brussels, when Mrs May will put her request to the other 27 EU leaders. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, has this report.
No one could accuse the Prime Minister of not covering the ground. But clocking up the miles isn't the same as convincing your audience. Theresa May landed in Berlin first to plead for more time. But the normal red carpet was rather lonely today. The Prime Minister had to wait for a welcome before the two leaders headed back outside for the usual snaps and smiles. The mission, though, not just to ask for delay, but to give the answer why.
We want to understand what the UK needs this extension for.
There's a real effort to try to bring structure to Brexit. You know, we've had extraordinary division, really.
We still need clarity from the UK side.
Theresa May has arrived in Berlin, where she's hoping to win.
The reason for the delay this time is to give more space for talks to play out at home. Those aren't government ministers on the march up Whitehall.
Morning, we're here to continue our discussions and we're looking forward to hearing what the government has to say. So we're just going to start those discussions now.
But Labour's team invited again for negotiations. If the Prime Minister can't get her Brexit deal through Parliament with Tory votes, they could compromise to get Labour numbers too.
There's not really been any fundamental shift of a change in position in the deal itself, but we're hopeful that progress will be made. We're continuing discussions with the government over the coming days.
Both sides engaged seriously on a number of issues. We're looking for a way forward. As you'd expect, there are a number of areas where we differ, but we are anxious to ensure that we can carry on with this process.
But at least one cabinet minister might still rather the Prime Minister goes back to basics.
What I think would be fantastic is if Angela Merkel will try to support a proper UK Brexit by agreeing to reopen the withdrawal agreement.
Number 10's official allies in Northern Ireland would like that too, but it's not happening, and they seem to be moving further away.
It is rather humiliating that we're having to go and beg so that we can leave. You know, it's nearly 3 years since the nation voted to leave the European Union, and we're now pleading to stay in so that we can deal with matters that should have been dealt with before now.
Easy in hindsight, in any language. The immediate job is hardest here in Paris. The Prime Minister to persuade the reluctant President that pressing pause on Brexit will be worthwhile. But he's just one of 27 leaders who'll have to agree a draft of an accord seen by the BBC tonight, which shows the EU club is poised to offer a delay to the UK. But for how long? 8 X's in the space where a date should be, the crucial blank to be filled in tomorrow night. Emmanuel Macron has long been Theresa May's toughest EU customer, so she's here tonight to ask for help. Let Brexit wait. He and other EU leaders are not likely to refuse her, but there's political cost to delay at home, and it might come with strings attached. Talks just a warm-up really for the main event in Brussels tomorrow, where the Prime Minister has no doubt learned on this painful journey. Even neighbours can be friends and allies, but rivals too. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Paris.
Well, we'll talk to Laura in Paris in just a moment, but first let's go to Brussels, where that summit is taking place tomorrow, and our Europe editor, Katya Adler, is there. Katya, a sense from you of what kind of reaction Mrs May is likely to get from the other 27 to this request?
Well, just to give you a sense first, Hugh, of the atmosphere here in Brussels tonight, until just a few seconds ago, 27 ambassadors, representatives of the 27 EU countries were locked for several hours in a room here, trying to forge some kind of united front on how to respond to the Prime Minister's request for a further Brexit extension. Of course, under EU law, they need to come to a unanimous conclusion at tomorrow's Brexit summit. This is a draft of their conclusion conclusions earlier this afternoon. But the key part here, where it should say the maximum amount of time the EU is willing to allot for another extension, has been left blank. EU leaders are still divided on this issue tonight. And anyway, Hugh, draft conclusions should always be taken with a big pinch of salt. EU leaders are perfectly capable of turning up at tomorrow's summit, ripping up those conclusions and starting again. They've done that before at Brexit summits, turning out to be much tougher in person and on the day than their diplomats here in Brussels were. So much depends on the chemistry between them tomorrow, and so much more depends on the Prime Minister's performance. First, she will give a presentation to EU leaders. They will then quiz her politely. No one wants to be seen to be humiliating her tomorrow. But her performance needs to be credible. They want to know how she's going to get the Brexit deal passed. And when she's left the room, then they'll debate the logic of whether a longer or shorter extension.
Katya, thanks. Let's go from Brussels to Paris, and Laura's there. Laura, what's your sense of the kind of reception that Mrs May's had today in Berlin and in Paris?
Well, I think, as Katya was suggesting, I think respectful listening, but also some very difficult questions. And it's clear tonight there is nothing settled about the kind of delay that they might be willing to offer her. And even if she does get one, there are plenty of awkward conversations still ongoing at home. First off, serious frustration, particularly among Brexiteers in her own party, about the fact that she's asking for any kind of delay at all, when for so long she said she would try to stick to the timetable. Second of all, genuine difficulties and dilemmas in those cross-party talks. That's the justification she's given to EU leaders about why she can credibly ask for more time. But those talks, while taking place in good faith, are difficult. And it seems tonight the more they talk, the more they understand just how big an ask it is to get the two parties onto the same page. And third, of course, the frustration from business, from families, from people around the country that another step in this process is a way of prolonging the agony. But for the Prime Minister, the decision from her has been ultimately that it is better to pursue this difficult path, to ask for another delay, than open what might have been a Pandora's box and leave at the end of this week without a formal arrangement with the EU in place. None of these easy calculations are possibly something that are going to end comfortably for the Prime Minister, but that's the decision that she's taken, but it's not in her hands to decide it.
We'll talk again tomorrow, Laura. Thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg in Paris and Katya Adler for us in Brussels.